Hello and welcome. You're watching I24 News, coming to you live from Tel Aviv. The top stories this hour. Several wounded as Hamas fires a barrage of rockets at the Kerem Shalom crossing from Rafah. The crossing had been used to transfer aid into Gaza. It has now been closed. Israel shuts down the offices of the Qatari news network Al Jazeera. The Foreign Press Association calls it a dark day. And Christians across the Arab world celebrate Orthodox Easter, but for Egypt's Copts, the festival is tainted with fear after a series of attacks by Islamists. Well, those are the top stories this hour. First of all, the Israeli government has voted unanimously to ban the Qatari news network Al Jazeera. Writing on X earlier today, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the network was a danger to national security. But the network's Jerusalem bureau chief says he will challenge that decision.
The government now approved unanimously shutting down the Hamas incitement mouthpiece in Israel, the Al Jazeera channel. The orders were just signed and we will put them into practice. The Hamas incitement mouthpiece, inciting against the state of Israel and harms Israel's security and the soldiers of the IDF, will no longer broadcast from Israel, and its equipment will be confiscated.
Background of this decision is not professional or journalistic things, it's political things, because at least Prime Minister Netanyahu and his far-right government that he is leading in Israel, they're looking all the time how to have benefits for their base, elected base. This decision is very dangerous one. Israel cannot claim all the time that she's a democracy, that it's democracy, and at the same time they are cutting and prevent the journalists to do their job, their professional duty to deliver all the information and the facts and the truth to the people.
Well, with me in the studio this hour, Benjamin Anthony is the CEO of the Miriam Institute. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Benjamin. So first of all, we just heard from the bureau chief there of Al Jazeera, obviously unhappy about this decision. The Foreign Press Association has called it a dark day for the media. What are your thoughts? Was this the right move?
Yeah, it's absolutely the right move, and it's the height of hypocrisy for that gentleman to be talking about this being a political rather than a professional decision. The fact of the matter is that Al Jazeera is merely a propaganda machine for all anti-Israel sentiment wherever it broadcasts to. It's high time that it was shattered. I'm pleased that it was shattered. I'm also pleased that the Minister of Communications did so in such a thorough manner. It's important for people to know that it was subject to the review and approval of the Prime Minister, and even that review and approval was subject to the gathering and reading and reviewing of position papers as to whether or not it was time for it to be shattered and whether or not it constituted that national security threat that you had talked about. So, yes, absolutely the right thing to do.
What about the timing of this, though, Benjamin? Right in the middle of a very delicate stage in the hostage negotiations, the Hamas official saying his delegation is leaving Cairo right now. I mean, was this the right move at this time?
Like a number of things that have happened since October the 7th, I think this should have been done some time ago. It probably should have been done on October the 7th. It should have probably been done prior to October the 7th. I don't think that anybody should attach too much significance to this decision when it comes to the negotiations between Hamas and Israel. The reality that we face is that it does not seem that Hamas wants a deal. We can talk about that in the fullness of this program. But the notion that, for example, the National Unity Party, led by Benny Gantz, decided to abstain from the vote of making the decision is yet another example of them failing to stand for anything significant, failing to state their position on anything. They should have either voted yes or no. The fact that they abstained really is an indictment on them.
The Foreign Press Association calling it a dark day. I don't remember them issuing any statements about when the UK and France decided to ban the Russian network, Russia Today, or Sputnik, for example. Right,
and the truth of the matter is you're far more of an expert on this topic with your long history in journalism and the media than most people would be. I think it's just another example of a different rule for Jews, different rule for the Jewish state. And if the state of Israel decides that it needs to shatter that particular channel, Al Jazeera. I think that it does so with a great basis for doing so. I think it's high time that it does shatter. And as I say, it's good that everything went, not just the broadcasting capabilities, but also the cell phones, also the ability of anybody to tune into it via the web here in Israel. The more we close it off, the better it is, the less harm it's doing to us here in Israel and to our soldiers who are fighting inside Gaza.
All right, Benjamin. Thank you very much, Benjamin Anthony there. Well, meanwhile, a Hamas official says that his delegation has now left Cairo following another sensitive hostage negotiation. Hamas has said no to every previous offer. And the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, set a deadline of 1 week for a response from Hamas. Otherwise, he said the IDF would go into Rafah, the last Hamas strongholds in Gaza. Well, the Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, spoke earlier. He says he believes Hamas was always going to say no. Take a listen.
We gave it a period of time, and we wanted to reach a situation in which we would achieve the release of the hostages as quickly as possible, with some delay in operational activity, because the hostages are in a difficult situation, and we need to make every effort to free them. We recognise alarming signs that Hamas actually does not intend to follow any agreement with us. This means action in Rafah and the entire Gaza Strip in the near future.
So, Benjamin, while the talks were going on, Hamas, of course, decided to fire a barrage of rockets at the Kerem Shalom crossing, which has been used to transport aid into Gaza. Israel, of course, has been criticised for not letting enough aid in. It opened up the border with Israel and brought in more aid. Is this a sign, do you think, that Hamas was not interested in a deal?
I don't think that Hamas is interested in a deal, as I said previously. But I really do think that Israel needs to take this matter into its own hands. Let me be very, very direct about it. The IDF needs to move forward. It needs to move forward into Rafah. It should never have paused prior to Ramadan. Never have paused prior to Ramadan. It needs to move forward there. It needs to kill and eliminate the leadership of Hamas. It needs to go in there and fight to bring back our hostages. And this notion that we're unable to do so because of international pressure is a total capitulation to everything other than what the Israeli people want. This government has been criticized by many, rightfully so, but it enjoys broad support around the idea of finishing off that threat inside the Gaza Strip, and it will not be finished without raiding Rafah. We can do it, we're up to the task, and we will succeed there if we make that decision.
And the criticism of Prime Minister Netanyahu, again, is that he never wanted a deal. He knows that most Israelis want the IDF to go into Rafah because they're just storing up trouble for the future. Do you think that he scuppered the deal?
No, I've no reason to think that the Prime Minister scuppered the deal. I know that there are many conspiracy theories about that. But I think that all good efforts have been made to come to a situation whereby Hamas is able to say that they will start to release our hostages. It was described by Secretary of State Blinken as an extremely generous deal. He said that Hamas's acceptance of the deal is basically a no-brainer. We're not dealing with a rational enemy. We are dealing with an Islamist, jihadist, fanatical enemy that is only going to understand one thing, and that is the sound of Israel's tanks closing in on the headquarters of Sinwar. That's what's needed at this stage.
Benjamin, thank you. Well, let's get more now on what happened at the Kerem Shalom crossing just a few hours ago. 10 rockets were fired at this crossing, which is used to bring in humanitarian aid. Al Zach Anders is down there for us now. Zach, what exactly happened, and what do we know about those who were injured in the attack?
Yeah, this is approximately 1:30 in the afternoon when IDF forces came under fire in the Kerem Shalom area. It appears that these were mortars, and that's how it's being described. Mortar launches that hit their position. We know as many as 10 are injured. 3 of those are said to be in serious condition, and the updates are expected to come through later this afternoon. Into the evening hours, we should know more. We're also seeing quite a bit of action from responses on both sides. The IDF says they've struck the position where these mortars were launched. There's no word as to any casualties in this area or as a result of this strike. There's also word from the IDF that this launch was carried out very close to a civilian area. They're describing it as a civilian shelter area. That might indicate that this was near one of the refugee areas, these massive sprawling tents tent areas that have been set up in on the outskirts of Rafah to support the influx of 1 million plus people that have come into this area. The edge of Rafah, and again, I should back up a little bit. This is being described as the launches that were fired some 300 to 500 meters away from where they landed in Kerem Shalom. It's a very close area where this is all taking place, and it would speak to mortars being launched in this case with that distance, 300 to 500 meters. We're also seeing just recently a Hamas official, Osama Hamdan, saying, quote, "The action in Kerem Shalom is a message from Hamas's military arm to the occupation that the consequences of any adventure carried out by his army will be different from what he imagines," end quote. Should be noted that a generous amount of IDF equipment has been staged in this area for the incursion into Rafah. This is the area where we're all going to be paying very close attention to in the coming hours and days should this hostage ceasefire deal fall apart. The question then being, as we've seen the defense minister's statement today, does that mean that an incursion into Rafah could take place in the very short term? I think that's the big question tonight.
Zach, thank you very much. Zach Andrews there in the south of Israel. Well, Israel under attack in the south and the north this Sunday. Around 40 rockets were fired at Israel's northern communities earlier, including here in Kiryat Shmona, where there were a number of direct hits on homes and vehicles. This town has been largely emptied of its residents for over half a year now, as the war with the Iranian proxy Hezbollah continues. No reports of any casualties today. Benjamin Anthony is with me, and they will be watching very closely, won't they, across the border in Lebanon, what happens now in Gaza. What is at stake if Israel does not defeat Hamas in Gaza?
If Israel doesn't defeat Hamas in Gaza, I believe that our southern flank here in Israel and our northern flank will be effectively ceded. I think that people forget that we've got about 80,000 of our civilians who are refugees in their own homes, having been evacuated from our northern front as a consequence of these attacks by Hezbollah. We still have many residents of the south who won't even think about going back until that threat of Hamas is quashed. We're not close to having done that. We are doing so militarily stage by stage. There are still these 4 to 6 battalions that we have to crush. And I think that it will be a very clear signal if we succeed in destroying the remnants of Hamas to Hezbollah that we are coming for them next. I would hope that that will be the case. I don't know if the government has the wherewithal to make that decision, but it's going to be necessary to do so because it doesn't seem there's a diplomatic solution to what's going on in northern Israel at the hands of Hezbollah.
Right, and in terms of diplomatic solutions, of course, the Americans and the French have come, haven't they, with their own proposals. They want to push Hezbollah north of the Litani River. This is a UN Resolution 1701 that's never been enforced. Just related to that, there is a report out that the US delayed an ammunition shipment to Israel recently, and that would have been the first time that happened. Just your thoughts on that in terms of where America is standing with Israel as it fights these two very dangerous enemies on its borders.
So I don't know the specifics of that report, but I do believe that Israel must urgently diversify away from the United States when it comes to weapons supplies, including to within itself, and also making deals and arrangements and partnerships with other countries. We cannot have a situation where all of our eggs are in one basket and we're not even the owners of the basket, but the Americans are. That's a very, very, very precarious situation for us to be in, and we're seeing the dangers of that play out in front of us.
All right, Benjamin, for now, thank you very much. Well, as Israel battles Hamas and Hezbollah, it's also fighting a wider war against disinformation and those who seek to deny the atrocities that were carried out on October 7th. Our Natasha Kerchuk has been meeting with one of the big names in Hollywood, Scooter Braun, who's taking an exhibit about the Nova Festival victims to New York City. He hopes it will help people learn the truth about what happened that dark day.
Oh my God. What's going on? What just happened? Oh my God!
May of 2017, an Islamic terrorist detonates a suicide bomb at the Manchester Arena in England, right after a concert by American pop star Ariana Grande. 22 people are killed and over 1,000 people are injured. The whole world responds with an outpour of love and support. And then, 6 years later, on October 7th, 2023, Hamas terrorists who share the same ideology brutally attacked the Nova Music Festival in southern Israel, killing hundreds. And there's silence from the international community. Some even say it's justified. Now, music mogul Scooter Braun is on a mission to change that. He's bringing the Nova exhibit to New York City, a recreation of what happened at the music festival on October 7th.
You were managing Ariana Grande during the Manchester Arena bombing, so you must have been deeply impacted by what happened at Nova.
I was shocked to see the world react the way that they did. When Manchester happened, they rallied. When Las Vegas happened, they rallied. This is the largest massacre in music history at a live event, and no one was talking about it. They were making it a political issue, and I don't think an attack on music festivals and innocent music lovers is about politics or about borders.
Bullet-ridden porta potties, burned cars, piles of personal belongings left behind in the chaos. These are just some of the shocking images at the Nova exhibit, which was originally created as a sort of homage to the victims in Tel Aviv. Now, anybody can buy tickets to see this in New York.
When I came to Israel and I met the survivors, when I saw they were just kids who love music, when they took me to the exhibit, I knew that the world needed to see this, that they could see themselves. They could see that this could have been Coachella, this could have been Lollapalooza, this could have been Stagecoach. I think by seeing yourself in this venue, you start to realize this is about humanity.
אני דור, הייתי במסיבת נובה, הייתה לי עמדה של מסאז'ים, הכל היה מדהים עד שהגיע שעה 6 בבוקר. אנחנו רואים שובלים של טילים עולים לאוויר, באותו רגע עוצרים את המוזיקה, צועקים, המסיבה נגמרה, כולם נכנסים לפאניקה, מתחילים להתפנות, לא יודעים מה לעשות, שוכבים על הרצפה, רצים לכל מקום, נהיה כאוס רציני במתחם. התחלנו לשמוע יריות מרחוק, מסתכל על הג'יפ, אנחנו נכנסים לתוך סרט.
מה יש?
This is just one of thousands of testimonies from Nova, a weekend-long trance music festival where over 3,000 people were partying on October 7th. Just before 7 a.m., hundreds of Hamas terrorists infiltrated the festival, transforming it into a hunting ground.
אנשים תופסים את הראש, מה עושים? התחיל להתקרב הירי 400 מטר, 300 מטר. מתחילים לרוץ לכיוון החניות, עולים על הג'יפ, מתחילים לנסוע בין אנשים, בין הקנטות עם הג'יפ. איכשהו מצליח לצאת לחניה האחורית, אני רואה חוליה של איזה 30-40 מחבלים עם נשקים, מתחילים להיכנס לתוך המתחם ולראות פשוט, ואני רואה אנשים רצים לכיוונים מהיציאות ופשוט נופלים כמו ברווזים.
Over 360 young people were murdered. Dozens were kidnapped, thousands were injured, and many were raped. Those who survived are still dealing with the aftermath of the trauma and may never truly recover.
אנשים לא יחזרו להיות מי שהם, גם אם החברים שיחזרו מעבר לגבול שלקחו אותם, לא יחזרו להיות אותו דבר. מלא גופות, מלא אנשים פצועים שלא יכולנו לעשות בשבילם כלום.
In December of 2023, less than 3 months after, Scooter Braun made his way to Israel to hear some of their stories firsthand. Usually you hear about Scooter on the news when it comes to Hollywood. He's managed and discovered some of the biggest music stars on the planet, from Justin Bieber to Demi Lovato and J Balvin. And he runs Hybe America, one of the biggest entertainment companies in the world. But after seeing and hearing about what happened in Israel, he felt a responsibility to use his voice.
As a music mogul who has been in the industry for so many years, why do you think that we haven't heard more condemnation from the music industry about the Nova Party massacre?
I think it's not necessarily that people are scared to support Israel. I think it's more scared to be supportive of anything that feels divisive. I think people, it's easier to stay silent and not have thousands of people yelling at you and telling you don't know what you're talking about. The amount of misinformation, the amount of hatred, the amount of noise to distract people from what took place was so incredibly overwhelming. That's why we're here. That's why I'm standing here in this exhibit in New York City, hoping to bring it to LA next and other places and for people to see it.
There are people hiding everywhere, everywhere. Under cars, in the bathroom cells, in the fridges of the bar. There were 30 people hiding in the bathroom cells. These bathroom cells are the original ones. They have bullets, signs in them. We marked them in order for all of the people to see. There were 30 people who were hiding there. Only 3 came out, 2 girls and a boy. Again, out of luck.
You've gotten a lot of love, but you've also gotten a lot of hate for speaking out in support of Israel and the Nova victims and survivors.
I think coming to Israel gave me a tremendous amount of strength. The people I met, every single one of them talked about peace. I mean, I met people who were shot through the leg, who almost died, who lost friends. And instead of talking about hatred, they talked about wanting peace on the other side. This is controversial for some, but I don't care. You should have room in your heart to have compassion for all innocent people. You should have room in your heart that you can call out for the hostages, but also want an innocent child in Gaza to be protected. I don't care what anyone says, all children are innocent.
What is your response to people who might come out and protest against this exhibit and call it political?
Well, it's a couple responses. One, don't talk to me about your want for peace or your want for anyone to have freedom unless you also acknowledge all people. And 2, you can make all the noise you want. It's not going to stop us from telling this story.
The United States says there will be no defence pact with Saudi Arabia unless the kingdom agrees to normalise ties with Israel. The National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan spoke amid speculation that the Saudis are seeking a Plan B deal with Washington as the war in Gaza continues. A number of Saudis, meanwhile, have reportedly been arrested for criticising Israel on social media. That's according to a report on Bloomberg, which claims one of those arrested was a prominent businessman involved in the Crown Prince's economic reform programme. Well, to talk about all of that, we're joined now by Luay Al-Sharif, peace activist and expert in Arab-Israeli relations. Good to see you, Luay. We've got a sneak peek at you there before you came on. Apologies for that. Good to see you as always.
Good to see you, Laura.
So first of all, had the Saudis been seeking an alternative deal with the United States? Is it just for Riyadh that normalisation is just far too sensitive, far too tricky at this moment?
Well, I believe that normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel is a matter of time. It will happen. It was the case before October 7th. The courageous leader of Saudi Arabia, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, said it a week or 10 days before October 7th, that every day we're getting closer. I believe there is a real intention for this to happen, to reconcile Mecca and Jerusalem, to bring Arabs and Israelis closer, to find a solution for the Palestinian cause. But because the situation now with the war is so difficult, Laura, I believe that there has to be some sort of ways not to cancel the deal with Israel, not to cancel the long-awaited peace agreement with Israel, but also to find ways to give to the Palestinians at least a clear roadmap to something that they can benefit out of this deal. And the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is working day and night to find something that would be suitable for the Palestinians, and also something that would make the Middle East more stable by having Mecca and Jerusalem reconciled.
What about these reports then that Saudis are being arrested for criticising Israel online? Is there any truth to that?
I don't think these reports are truthful. I think there's a misunderstanding of some news that being circulated, Laura. And here's the fact. So Hamas and PIJ and other militant groups in Saudi Arabia are banned. And the Muslim Brotherhood as an organization is banned. Also here in the UAE, thank God, and in Saudi Arabia and in so many moderate Muslim countries, by the way. So praising Hamas and praising Al-Qassam Brigade and praising PIJ is something different than criticizing Israel by itself. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia is criticizing Israel. You have lots of prominent Saudi influencers in Saudi Arabia and outside Saudi Arabia who are criticizing Israel without being jailed or without being put to prison, but glorifying the actions of those militant extremists, fanatics, is something different. And the Saudi law doesn't look to sympathizing with those militants as a normal thing. It's a crime.
And talking about banning things, what are your thoughts on Israel's decision to close the Al Jazeera network here? I understand it is already banned in the UAE and Egypt and other Arab countries. Do you think it's the right decision?
I join Israel in celebration in closing Al Jazeera, because I always say that, Laura, and I said it in my last campus tour in the US, there's a difference between freedom of speech and incitement. I've spoken to many Americans and they said, Luay, taking the freedom of speech out of our life is like taking our God. Taking the First Amendment out of our life is like taking out our God. And I'm absolutely with freedom of speech, but there's a difference between freedom of speech and incitement. Al Jazeera is being played as the spokesman of Hamas and the spokesman and incited vehemently against Israel on the 7th of October. Let's remember, Laura, 7th of October is the reason why we have this ugly war that could end today if Hamas lays down its arms and release all the hostages. Al Jazeera was one of the key news channels that brainwashed so many people in the area with lots of anti-Semitism, with lots of hate against the Jews and against Israel. Closing it is absolutely not against democracy, not against free speech, but these people incite hate. And those who incite hate deserve to be shut down.
All right, Luay, thank you very much indeed. Luay Al-Sharif there in Abu Dhabi. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you, Laura.
Well, time for a short break. When we come back, commemorations begin this evening as Israel remembers the victims of the Holocaust. A special ceremony is underway at Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. We'll have more on that for you next. Stay with us.
world. The I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds.
De la frontière qui sépare Israël.
The state of emergency and war in Israel.
Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels. Now on Hot.
Welcome back. Well, tonight Israel will begin commemorations for Yom HaShoah, the National Day of Remembrance for the victims of the Holocaust. A special ceremony will get underway at Hostage Square in Tel Aviv shortly, where we now find our correspondent Balir Sladin. And Balir, a painful reminder of the fact October 7th was the deadliest single day for Jews since the Holocaust, but also a reminder that among the hostages being held right now in Gaza are actual Holocaust survivors, such as 85-year-old Shlomo Mansour.
Yes, we'll talk shortly about Shlomo Mansour, but let's take a quick look about what's happening in here behind me at the Hostage Square, as we see people are gathering here in front of this stage where the initiative Memory in the Salon, Zicharon Basalom, is going to take place at the Hostage Square. They decided to do that here for obvious reason. They bring Holocaust survivors to talk to younger generation in order to ensure that the memory won't vanish. And today, Hannah Gofrit, a Holocaust survivor, will talk on the stage alongside other people, and also to families of the hostages that they have a special, of course, reason to be here. One of them is Tzibi Hel. She is the grandmother of a hostage, and she is a daughter of a Holocaust survivor. The other family of a hostage, or a relative actually, is Omri Shatif, who is a brother of a hostage, and he himself is a grandson of a Holocaust survivor. 133,000 Holocaust survivors are still alive in Israel, and of course many of them has been saying that they couldn't imagine that such an event, the October 7th attack, would take place again at their lifetime. We've seen lots of them talking in the screen here behind me, saying that the most valuable thing that Israel can do is actually bringing back the hostages. Now, regarding Shlomo Mansour, he is 86 years old right now. He celebrated his birthday in the Hamas captivity in Gaza. Shlomo survived the Farhud events, which happened in 1941 in Baghdad. There are a lot of people that make a link between that and the Holocaust. Of course, he came to Israel at the age of 13. He was captured on 7th of October, and he is for over 200 days, has been held as a hostage in Gaza. Of course, his family is calling for his release as soon as possible, but unfortunately, there is at least until now no sign of life from him. He's one of the few that we still don't know much of the details about his situation right now in Gaza.
Balir, thank you. Balir Sladin there. Well, with me in the studio, Benjamin Anthony is the CEO of the Miriam Institute. I mean, it's always a difficult day, Yom HaShoah, but of course it is particularly painful this year, especially when Holocaust survivors are right now being held in Gaza.
Yeah, it's a particularly important day. It's always an important day. It underscores, to my mind, the importance of having a state for the Jewish people. The state for the Jewish people, of course, is Israel. It needs to be defended, it needs to be protected. And I actually want to go back to the previous guest that you had, who seemed like a wonderful fellow, Loai. I agreed with much of what he said. But when he spoke about the need for a roadmap for the Palestinian Arabs, I completely disagree with that. There should be no roadmap put out that in any way is aligned with the notion of a two-state solution, in my opinion. They don't deserve it. It's deleterious and dangerous to the existence of the states of Israel. You do not kick out 250,000 Jews from Judea and Samaria in order to provide a home for the Palestinian Arabs, in my opinion, which would be required in the two-state solution. And if we want to make sure that never again means never again, we need to preserve the state of Israel, protect the state of Israel, and no matter which people calls for it and says that they're entitled to it, that doesn't mean that they can have it. And all of us should learn that lesson now, and we should speak to that, and we should absolutely abandon the notion of giving away our land and our defences to uplift another people. Let us first take care of our own people.
All right, Benjamin, thank you. Well, with the Holocaust still in living memory, anti-Semitism is surging around the world. A new report out today from the Anti-Defamation League and Tel Aviv University shows that even before October 7th, it was on the rise. But since then, verbal and physical attacks on Jews have surged globally. Our senior correspondent Bianca Zanini reports.
Across the Western world, pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel protesters are taking over university campuses and city streets. And across the Western world, anti-Semitic sentiment continues to grow. According to the annual Anti-Semitism Worldwide report published by Tel Aviv University and the Anti-Defamation League, 2023 saw an increase of dozens of percentage points in the number of anti-Semitic incidents in Western countries in comparison to the year before, the number growing long before the Gaza war broke out in October.
There should be no confusion. The year is not 1938, nor is it 1933. But if current trends continue, then the curtain may well descend on the ability to lead Jewish lives in the West, to attend the synagogue, to frequent a Jewish cultural center, to learn Hebrew, to wear a Star of David, to wave the Israeli flag. October 7 did not start the fire. It helped spread a fire that was already burning.
The report concludes that the effort to fight anti-Semitism on a global scale has failed.
One of our biggest challenges is how to unite in fighting anti-Semitism without making it the one definer of Jewish identity in our times.
The report focuses on last year, but the scale and intensity of the pro-Palestinian protests happening on campuses in the past months have made many Jewish students feel unsafe, and governments express worry about the growing anti-Semitic sentiment on European and American soil.
The culture on this campus, predating October 7th, has allowed anti-Semitism to flourish.
Contrary to the conventional wisdom, post-October 7th incidents of anti-Semitism were also led from the far right in America. The fringes in the United States are encroaching on the political center from both the left and the right, making combating anti-Semitism much trickier.
Most of the chants at university campuses are not simply protesting the war in Gaza, but expressly pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel.
This dangerous rhetoric that is spewed in the encampments calls for the death of all Zionists. And something that I do think is really incredibly important to mention is that anti-Zionism is most definitely anti-Semitism.
In response to this trend, several groups are now planning rallies in the coming days to show that there should be room for empathy for both Palestinians and Israelis affected by the war.
And one of the most high-profile displays of anti-Semitism of late has been on American university campuses, where anti-Israel protests have often slipped into open support for terrorism and for calls to murder Jews. Benjamin Anthony from the Miriam Institute is still with me. And Benjamin, I mean, the astonishing scenes on American universities, and they have been really astonishing. I think a lot of Americans have had a bit of a wake-up call themselves, whatever they feel about Israel. But many are now following the money. How did students get to learn this? How did professors get to teach this blatant anti-Israel, but more than that, anti-Western ideology?
Yeah, I'm really sorry to say this, but I told you so. I've been lecturing on university campuses since 2007 in the United States of America. Now, let me give some context. When I was 14, my brother was beaten almost to death. He had to have 3 liver transplants because he's a Jew in the city of Manchester. When I went to university, I became a student campaigner during the events of the Second Intifada, and then my parents moved to Israel as Jeremy Corbyn was making a run to become Prime Minister of the UK. So there you have physical anti-Semitism, campus anti-Semitism, political anti-Semitism. I saw the seeds of all of those taking root in the United States of America. And I warned the members of American Jewry that that which we saw in Britain is now going to be transposed onto the American academic scene, and that academic scene bleeds into the political echelons in the United States. People didn't really want to believe it. Only very, very few were able to understand that. The reality is that Jewish people in America are on the cusp not of living an existence akin to European Jews in the 1930s, but akin to the existence of the European Jewish community today. What does that look like? The inability to feel safe on campus, the inability to wear a kippah in the street, and the inability to counter the rise of anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist politicians who are elected into office. And I disagree with the report. There is a very strong strain coming from the left of the political aisle. There is some challenge on the right in the United States. There's no question about that. We all remember those scenes. But the bulk of this is coming from the left in politics, the left in academia. And in fact, now we're seeing that it's actually there even in the high schools.
And Qatar has been very defensive and said that, you know, we're not funding these programs. This isn't us. This isn't anything to do with us. But when you look at the foreign funding, they are the #1 donor to a lot of these schools.
Yeah, of course they are. And that's what happens when you run your education system like it's a business rather than a non-for-profit or rather than a conscientious endeavor. The Americans have accepted massive amounts of funding. And by the way, before the Qataris, who are certainly doing it, the Saudis were doing the same. It comes with strings attached, and nobody should be surprised that there is a fifth column now on American campuses. But the most horrific aspect of all of it is that many of those who power these protests are anti-Israel, self-loathing Jews. That needs to be tackled as well.
What about the way that President Biden spoke out on this last week? What about the way that the politicians have tried to get a handle on this?
I appreciate when President Biden says that there's no place for this on the university campuses, but that's mere rhetoric. It's not a serious policy. What people need to understand is that these anti-Israel protests on the campuses, they're also anti-American protests as well. In our organization, as an example, we work with the military academies because the military academies in the US have 3 pillars that we find very, very positive. They're not allowed to protest in support of a terror organization, otherwise they'll be expelled. Who would have thought that a standard such as that was required? But it is. They're not allowed to protest in opposition to an ally of the United States. But more importantly, Laura, they are not allowed to accept a penny of foreign funding. That's where real leadership's going to come from. What's coming out of these campuses is actually spelling, in my opinion, the swift demise of the United States writ large, because the students of today will be the policymakers of tomorrow. And they are being educated in environments that are hostile to Israel, hostile towards Jews, and hostile towards the United States.
All right, Benjamin, thank you. Well, Israel has for the first time confirmed it was behind an attack close to the Iranian city of Natanz last month. The Transport Minister Miri Regev said in an interview with Israeli TV that Israel did indeed retaliate after an unprecedented drone and missile attack that Tehran launched on Israel a week earlier. Meanwhile, an Iranian warship armed with drones and missiles has crossed into the southern hemisphere for the first time. That's according to Iranian state media. And separately, Iran and Egypt have agreed to continue on the path to normalizing relations. Here to talk about all of that, Camelia Entekabifard is the editor-in-chief at the Independent Persian. Great to see you, Camelia. Thank you for being with us. And so, official confirmation from Israel for the first time about that attack close to Natanz last month. Does this change anything in Tehran?
Thank you, dearest Laura, and happy Sunday to everyone. It wouldn't change anything that has been known and understood during those days of the high tensions between Iranian and Israelis. We understand that the escalation between Iran and Israel is not at the best interest of the United States. And the Americans were strongly demanding both sides to stay away from further escalation. No, it wouldn't change anything, this declaration of the Israeli minister.
Okay, worst kept secret in the Middle East, it would appear. What is the situation, meanwhile, Camelia, with this warship, the Shahid Madavi? What is the significance of it moving into the southern hemisphere, and why does Iran want to publicize this?
Maybe exaggerations of Iranian Navy power. This is not the first time happened. We see that sort of the navies with the cruise missiles and the ability of the drone and anti-cruise missiles has been traveling inside of the international waters. Previous time, if you remember, 2 years ago, during those massive sanctions of the United States and the war in the oil ships war in the areas of the Strait of Hormuz and the Indian Ocean, oceans, Iranian also send their Navy ships to accompany their oil tankers towards Venezuela. All the way, this Iranian type of the navies has been traveled with them all the way to Venezuela. This is not the first time. It's just a little exaggerations to show their Navy ability or capable to confront any threats that it wants to impose the Iranian Navy.
And finally, Iran is set to normalise ties with another Arab country after Saudi Arabia, of course, famously with that Chinese brokered deal a year ago. What can we expect from the rapprochement with Cairo?
This is my favorite topic, to be honest with you. For years, I'm writing and then monitoring the development. As everyone understands, from the early time of the revolution, when Anwar Sadat, the former president of Egypt, assassinated, the relation between the two countries shut down. When Iran called them straight after the killer of Anwar Sadat, Khaled Istanbuli in Tehran. So that was a little development, and we saw that the Charles Affairs exchange 11 years ago between the two countries. And since they have lots of struggle, despite of the approval of the supreme leader that the two countries is important to have the relation back to the normalization, still there is a hesitant. We understand that during the revolution in Syria, Egypt was the only country has the same vision as Iran, and they had their embassies open in Damascus with full operation and supporting Bashar Assad, which it was a phenomenon, despite of all of those objecting point of view with the Islamic Republic. But now the Egyptians' economy somehow went under the shadow of the war of the Houthis with Israelis. The direct consequences of threatening the Navy ships in Red Sea has been affecting the economy in Egypt, because now the Navy ship have to, the oil tankers and every goods has to cross from the Somal rather than the Suez Canal, which it put lots of pressure on the Egyptians. They are interested to discuss these points with the Iranian. They are interested to discuss the tourism. There are 8 million of Shia living in Egypt. They are interested to go and visit some of the holy shrines in Iran. And at the same time, for the Iranian, there are huge interest to go to Cairo and visit the King of Iran's burial place in Refai Mosque, with all of those security situation, which is in the concern of the Egyptians. But I believe the Egyptians still will hold them back to see how this relation between Iran and Saudi Arabia be going on, and it would be a tangible results they were seeing. And by then, you can see maybe little by little the relation can be warm up, but it would be not an immediate.
Camelia, as always, thank you very much indeed. Camelia Entekabifad there. Benjamin Anthony still with me in the studio. Do you think Israel should be concerned about Iran reaching out to Israel's neighbours?
Yeah, definitely Israel should be very concerned about that. There's something that's always worried me about the Abraham Accords, which is that it's predicated upon an alliance against Iran's nuclear capabilities. That seems to be what got it over the line. Now, I don't personally think that Israel is going to take out Iran's nuclear capabilities. If Iran goes nuclear, it will behoove some of the signatories of the Abraham Accords to then make more of a rapprochement with the Iranians. That's an option that they enjoy, that Israel will never enjoy. Israel needs to be very clear-eyed about that, very calculated about it, and yes, it should all concern us.
All right, Benjamin Anthony from the Miriam Institute, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, this Sunday marks Orthodox Christian Easter, a significant day for millions of people worldwide. And this year, Orthodox Christians in the Middle East are observing their sacred holiday in the shadow of the war in Gaza and attacks by religious extremists. More in this report.
Bells and cheers, incense and flames. One of the most important events in the Orthodox Christian calendar is the ceremony of the Holy Fire, illuminating the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. As the faithful observe Easter, this sacred moment, according to Christian tradition, symbolizes the resurrection of Jesus, when a flame appears inside Jesus' tomb and ignites a cascade of candlelight, spreading from Jerusalem to every Christian Orthodox church across the globe. The Orthodox Easter is traditionally celebrated according to the Julian calendar, which differs from the Gregorian calendar used in the West. And in the Middle East, this year's Easter is marked in the shadows of war in Gaza.
This year is very sad, but I wish with the light of the holy fire from Jerusalem will give peace all around the world. Thank you and happy Easter. Jesus is risen.
In Gaza City, at the only Christian Orthodox church in the Strip, worshipers unite in prayer for an end to the ongoing conflict.
This Easter, we wish that the war will end in Gaza and for peace to prevail in the world, and in Gaza specifically, this is our wish. And we wish that Easter will be celebrated every year in peace, and celebrate next year in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem.
From the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem, believed to be the birthplace of Jesus, to Coptic Christians in Egypt, who have recently faced their own conflict in form of attacks by extremists, the arrival of the Holy Fire kindles a flame of hope.
The message that I can deliver at a time when the entire world is suffering from troubles, wars and crises, is that Easter always brings joy and hope. We want to hang on to hope and joy and pray for peace all over the world.
From Jerusalem's Holy Fire to the prayers for peace echoing in churches worldwide, this Easter brings a universal longing for harmony amid conflict.
Well, Egypt's Coptic community lives somewhat precariously and has come under attack by Islamists, most recently just a week ago in the city of Minya, where a third of the community lives. The latest violence appears to have been triggered by plans to build a new church. Khaled Hassan is an Egyptian counter-terrorism expert, and he's with us now. Good to see you, Khaled. First of all, what happened towards the end of last month, and how typical are these kinds of attacks?
Thanks for having me, Laura. So it's actually really a challenging situation because you have a community that was reportedly going to build a church. We don't really know if this was the case or if this was some rumors that somebody spread. And then they became under attack. They knew that they were expecting some attacks, and then they raised this to the authorities and said, we are, under increasing threats. And then it happened. They basically attacked the community, and they started targeting homes. We had around 11 homes that were targeted by those people. Really, the reports we've seen are just awful, to be honest. You had reports that they were trying to escape their homes, and Islamists were basically blocking them, making sure that they don't escape from their homes, and trying to, in a way, burn them alive. So this was one case. The other case was they were actually, the other narrative was that they were trying to get them out. So force them out, which is more consistent. This is more consistent with what we have seen. They always go and say to a few families, right, we have a conflict with you. We don't want you here. You need to go. And we've seen this a lot. We've seen this, for instance, when somebody, a Christian, would criticize Islam or an Islamic symbol, and then the Islamists would just go and say, you and your family now need to go. And they would force them out and expel them. So that's what happened, and unfortunately, I think it's quietened down now. Egyptian security is very concerned. Egyptian security takes this very seriously, but also they are very experienced when it comes to this because it does happen, tends to happen quite often in a way. It's not something that happens every day, but I think it's, we have many instances. It's quite consistent, basically.
Well, I should say President Assisi did reach out to the community on social media earlier today, so perhaps an attempt to reach out. But tell us, what is life like for Egypt's Copts more generally? Do they have equal rights under the law, for example?
That's a very interesting concept, actually, because you always have, so under the law, yes, they have equal rights. So constitutionally, the Constitution says that Islam, Christianity, and Judaism are the Abrahamic faiths. So these are the three big ones. These are the only religions that are actually recognized officially by the state. But also, when you look at statistics, so you're going to see, for instance, there is this law in Egypt that basically criminalizes disrespect towards religions. You're always going to see that Muslims are hardly prosecuted under this law. It's mostly Christians. It's mostly others, the minorities, basically, and that shows that there is a degree of discrimination, and that's sadly sadly the case, even more so when it comes to Judaism. So you're always going to find TV shows that are horrifically disrespectful, horrifically anti-Semitic towards the Jewish faith generally, not even, like politics or anything, just the actual faith, and around conspiracy theories. But they're never prosecuted. So there is a lot of discrimination. I think it comes mostly from the people, actually. President Sisi was the first president to attend Christmas Mass. A couple of years ago, and I want to remind everyone of this, he said this publicly. He said, why do you have a problem with us building a church, a new church, or renovating a Jewish synagogue? And this is what he actually said to the public, to everyone. He said, why do you Muslims have a problem with this? So he's very open-minded. He would like to see equality, I believe. But unfortunately, it's so widespread and it's so common in Egyptian society that it's just almost impossible to root it out. And that's the challenge we have.
Right, and would you say that the Copts are affected by the current upheaval and conflict in the region?
I wouldn't say so, because unfortunately, you're going to find that the Copts are actually, in a way, they also share the same anti-Semitic views. They share the same pan-Arabism kind of views, because that's just what it is. Because when you live in a society like this, you cannot go against it. If you go against it, then that's a problem. So you're always going to see that the Egyptian church, for instance, bans visits to Jerusalem for pilgrimage. Some people still manage to go, but generally the known public position is that, they say this quite often, actually, the leadership of the church, we're not going to go until Palestinians are liberated. So they're not, but also I think that Islamists generally are emboldened. Yes, they feel like, they feel like this is a threat to Muslims. And when they see stuff like this happening in Gaza, when they see the war in Gaza, they feel like, oh, hold on, a new church is being built. They're taking over the land. We need to dominate, which is it's a Muslim supremacist concept. And that's why I think that there is some sort of correlation between these events, yes.
Khaled, thank you very much. Fascinating. Thank you very much indeed. Khaled Kassan there.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's programme. Do stay with us here on I24 News. We'll have special coverage of Holocaust Memorial Day, Yom HaShoah, with Kalev Ben-David and his guests right after this.
Las consecuencias.
Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. This is a broadcast marking the beginning of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day. We will be bringing you live during this broadcast the official opening ceremony of Holocaust Remembrance Day or Memorial Day from the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial Museum in Jerusalem. We're seeing it there. The ceremony will begin shortly. We'll be bringing that to you live over the next 90 minutes. We will be hearing, of course, from Israeli President Isaac Herzog, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and of course, there will be these special ceremonies for the lighting of the torch by Holocaust survivors. Of course, this is a day that is a Holocaust, Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day in the shadow of the October 7th attack. The global rise in anti-Semitism we have seen since October 7th. And also, unfortunately, an attack just today on the Kerem Shalom crossing on the Gaza Strip. And of course, concern over how whether a hostage deal will be forthcoming in the next hours or days or not. I'm joined in the studio by Ambassador Avi Pazner, the former Israeli ambassador to France and Italy, former world chairman of Keren Hayesod United Israel PL, but more germane to this broadcast, someone who as an infant, really, a child escaped with his family from Poland just in the days before the beginning of the Holocaust, the Nazi invasion, and his father, of course, your father in Switzerland, working for the Jewish Agency, engaged in the rescue of Jews in Europe during the Holocaust.
Yes, our family is very involved. First of all, we are here by a miracle because it's only a few weeks before the war that the family managed to escape from Poland to Switzerland, where they found shelter during the war. And as you well said, my father was the representative of the Jewish Agency. Then, that was the government of the Jewish people, the representative of David Ben-Gurion in Switzerland. And his main job during the war was to save Jewish lives in Europe, and I believe he saves thousands and thousands, maybe more than that. Nobody knows.
Right. One of them got in touch with you quite recently, I understand.
Yes, an amazing story, by the way. 2 weeks ago, the phone rang in my house. I picked the phone. There is a man who...
All right, Avi, I want to ask you to hold on. Do we have the broadcast now from Yad Vashem? If so, we should be going to it.
An acting Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and his wife, accompanied by Chairman of Yad Vashem Council and Chairman of Yad Vashem, are now entering. You are kindly requested to rise.
המשמר יחטיף את נשקו. החטף, שק. המשמר ידגל את נשקו. דגל, שק.
All right, there we're seeing President Isaac Herzog and his wife. We see Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu next to him. And on the other side of Benjamin Netanyahu is Dani Dayan. He is the chairperson of the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial Museum.
President of the State of Israel, Prime Minister, Speaker of the Knesset and his spouse, Acting Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and his wife, Honorable Chief Rabbis of Israel, the 10th President of the State of Israel, Chairman of Yad Vashem Council, Chairman of Yad Vashem, Chairwoman of the Center of Holocaust Survivors Organization in Israel, Doyen of the Diplomatic Corps serving in Israel, Holocaust survivors from Israel and overseas, distinguished audience, one and all, to mark the opening of the National Holocaust Martyrs and Heroes Remembrance Day, the national flag will be lowered to half-mast.
המשמר יחטיף את נשקו. הכתב, שק.
I'm honored to invite Chairman of the Yad Vashem Council, Rabbi Israel Meir Lau, to light the remembrance torch.
דגל, שק. המשמר יחטיף את נשקו. הכתב, שק. המשמר יציג את נשקו. הצג, שק. המשמר יעבור לנוח, עמוד נוח.
נא לשבת.
Please be seated. As we open this ceremony, we would like to say a prayer for the swift return of the hostages, our brothers and sisters held in captivity in Gaza, for the safety of our soldiers fighting on the borders of our land, and for the quick and full recovery of those who have been wounded in battle. We embrace the bereaved families who have lost their loved ones. Holocaust Martyrs and Heroes Remembrance Day 2024 is titled A Lost World, the destruction of the Jewish communities. The Jewish community, a unique, autonomous social unit that characterized Jewish existence in the diaspora through the ages, was dealt a fatal blow by the Holocaust. It characterized Jewish existence throughout the generations and was the most important framework in the lives of Jews from the moment they were born until they were buried. In times of joy and grief, the Jews were connected to the communal institutions which provided them with an identity and a framework. On the eve of World War II, thousands of pre-war Jewish communities in the East and in the West lived a rich life, bustling with education and culture, welfare, and mutual assistance frameworks. These communities embraced both scientific and academic research and the study of Torah and doing mitzvahs. With the rise of the Nazis to power in Germany and the outbreak of the war, Jewish society was forcibly plunged into an extreme reality. The systematic murder campaign waged against the Jews inflicted utter devastation upon thousands of communities. The post-Holocaust Jewish world found itself in a jarringly harsh new reality. Millions of Jews had been murdered, and with them an array of venerable communal institutions and the wealth of Jewish civilization had been obliterated. The legacy of the Jewish community is one of the most magnificent and cherished treasures that Jewish history had bequeathed us. The destruction of the communities during the Holocaust is a deep wound inflicted upon the body and the soul of the Jewish people. President of the State of Israel, Mr. Yitzhak Herzog.
המשמר יעבור לנוח, עמוד נוח.
בשעה זו
At this time, at this moment, a moment of memory, as we begin the terrible days of awe of Israeli life, which start this evening and will come to an end on the 76th Independence Day of the State of Israel, an aura of holiness befalls upon the land, and silence engulfs all households in Israel. But this is not an ordinary year, and this is not an ordinary Memorial Day, Remembrance Day. This year, the State of Israel is at war. We are at war. 212 days have passed since the terrible massacre carried out by the Hamas terror organization, who massacred babies, children, and elderly, men and women. And since then, we've waged a campaign for many days and with much blood, as we've seen today at Kerem Shalom just a few hours ago, since our brothers and sisters have been abducted by a ruthless enemy, and our heart is with them. I embrace to our hearts the families of the hostages, and I cry out and I pray and I hope and commit on behalf of the entire nation. We will not rest until our sons and daughters return home. I embrace from here the beloved bereaved families, and I strengthen the IDF soldiers and the members members of the security forces and yearn for their safe return and for their success, and for the swift return to their homes of those who have been evacuated from these homes. And I pray for the full recovery, both in body and soul, of those who have been wounded. As I stand here today at Yad Vashem, just at the bottom of Mount Herzog, I remember a video that I saw during the war which moved me deeply, and it embodies the essence of this holy place. Holocaust and resurrection are intertwined, are embraced, because this was an image of a grandfather and a grandson. The grandfather, Eliakim Hollander, a 96-year-old Holocaust survivor and a lieutenant colonel in reserves in the IDF. The grandson, Ori Hollander, who was in reserve duty and who came home for his first respite from battle. And he came to visit his grandfather with the uniform and the weapon. They embrace, and the grandfather, the Holocaust survivor, whispers to the grandchild with tears rolling down his cheeks, Baruch Hashem, thank God that I got to see you with weapons, protecting and defending us. And he added, you are my victory. Our beloved Holocaust survivors, the heroes of the resurrection, family members, and the future generations, distinguished audience, Prime Minister, member of Knesset Benjamin Netanyahu, Chairman of the Knesset, Speaker of the Knesset, member of Knesset Amir Ohana and his spouse, Acting Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Justice Uzi Fogelman and his wife, Chief Rabbis, the 10th President of the State of Israel, Reuven Ruvi Rivlin, ministers and Knesset members, the heads of the security systems, the Intel and Homeland Security, Mayor of Jerusalem, Moshe Leon, Chairman of the Yad Vashem Council, Rabbi Israel Meir Lau, Chairman of Yad Vashem, Mr. Dani Dayan, ambassadors and diplomatic representatives, dear citizens of the State of Israel, on April 11th, 1945, the 28th of the month, the Jewish month of Nisan, the U.S. Army forces reached the Buchenwald concentration camp on German land, and the gates of hell opened up. There were 4,000 Jews at the camp at the time, men and women, elderly and children, only remnants of entire families, the last remains of rich communities that were burned to ashes. One of them, as we all know, is you, Rav Israel Meir Lau Shalita, who also later became the chief rabbi of the State of Israel and the chairman of the Yad Vashem Council. They had known so much suffering and death. They were lying there hungry and starving, completely exhausted and sick, and their families have been tortured and massacred, butchered and burned, and they were certain that they were the only Jews left in the world. And amongst those who were liberated from Buchenwald was Naftali First, who was 12 years old, prisoner number B14026. In this image, an iconic one that was taken in Buchenwald, you can see Naftali immediately after liberation on the top bench looking forward, and beneath him was Eli Wiesel of blessed memory, one of the great giants of our people, and also later on he was a Nobel Prize laureate. Naftali First was born in Slovakia. For 3 years, from the age of 9 to 12, he was in 4 different camps, including Auschwitz-Birkenau, where he was separated from his parents. We are the embers who weren't burnt completely in the Great Fire. There aren't many like me who can still remember and talk about what had happened there. Naftali once said, and he added, I feel like I'm the last survivor, like the last witness. On October 7th, in the murderous Hamas attack, his granddaughter, Naftali's granddaughter, Mika, was there with her spouse, Asif, and their 2.5-year-old son, Neta, at their house in Kfar Aza. They were closed in the safe room for almost 24 hours without any water, food, or electricity. Their relatives and friends, including Asif's mother and her spouse, Tami, and her spouse, Eitan, were massacred. The neighbors homes were being set on fire, and they could not stop hearing these yells of horror and shooting. 10%, 1/10 of that small community of Kibbutz Kfar Aza were perished on that terrible Saturday, and almost 20 people were abducted to the terror tunnels in Gaza in the day that the greatest number of Jews were massacred and murdered on one day since the Holocaust. The people of Israel, my brothers and sisters, for decades, the decades that had passed since the Holocaust, we promised time and again, never again, and we swore that the Jewish people will never stand again helpless and defenseless. And despite all that, and because of all that, the images of October 7th completely undermined our world and reminded us of the horrors of the Holocaust. For me as well, these descriptions of mothers who had to silence their babies so that their crying will not tell the murderers where they were, children who were torn from their parents, and these terrible murderers who saw the Nazis as a role model and tortured, burnt, and massacred entire families reminded us the terrible period in the history of our nation. But especially on this day, I asked us to listen carefully to what Naftali first said after the massacre. And this is what he said to his granddaughter, Mika. He said, "It is similar, it is scary, and there are no words to describe this cruelty, but it is not the same thing. It is not a Holocaust. A second Holocaust will never happen again." And indeed, it was not a Holocaust. It wasn't a Holocaust because the Holocaust was the deepest and darkest abyss in human history at any scale. Throughout the history of mankind, there wasn't such a similar, methodic, systematic genocide at such great scale, which crossed countries and continents, that lasted for so long. It lasted months and years. That was the Holocaust of the Jews. One of every 3 Jews in the world was murdered by the Nazi extermination machine. In Auschwitz alone, which was the factory of death, the symbol of horror, about 10,000 Jews were murdered every day. But the scale, the magnitude of the Holocaust are not the only reason. It was not a Holocaust because today we have the State of Israel and the Israel Defense Forces. Despite the fact that the outcome of this disaster and shock still reverberate, we do not forget that we have what our brothers and sisters who perished in the Holocaust could only dream of. They could only imagine. We have a country, we have a military that is fighting right now as we're speaking. They are fighting for our national homeland, and a homeland of independence. And I say this with utmost belief, despite the disaster and the grief that we still experience, this house, this home, nothing could demolish it. This nation, this people who have gone through the worst Holocaust and still resurrected in their homeland 2,000 years after they were expelled and deported from it, nothing can exterminate it. I hear the anxiety and the fear among many in our people. People ask me with deep concern, what's going to happen? And I understand these anxieties, but I answer in the most clear-cut manner. I believe that the eternity of the Jewish people will not lie. I believe in the Jewish people, in the people of Israel, in the state of Israel, and I believe in our duty to maintain these. And for that, on this holy day, we must commit once again to rebuild ourselves while relying on 3 tenets, 3 pillars that had weakened before October 7th. And these are the element, the pillar of self-defense, the pillar of unity and partnership, and the pillar of hope and belief. And the first pillar, we shall forever know how to defend ourselves while Iran and its terror proxies are attacking us. The state of Israel must continue to develop its capabilities to defend itself on its own from any kind of threat and attack. And we must maintain international diplomatic alliances, both global and regional. And this combination will guarantee our resilience and strength as a Jewish and democratic democratic state. And this pillar of defense, of course, also pertains to our brothers and sisters in the diaspora all over the world who are now threatened and attacked in both their communities and the campuses. And I call out to them from this place, from our eternal capital, and I say, we stand with you shoulder to shoulder as we face these anti-Semitic attacks, these attacks of terror and hatred targeting you, the state of Israel with you. We are all with you. The second pillar is the pillar of partnership and unity. We must not forget that our historic claim for a state, a claim that received full backing and confirmation of all the nations in the world and the international institutions, relies, among other things, on the fact that we are one nation entitled to its own nation state. So when I say unity, I refer to the fact that we are one people. When I say unity, I mean both to our unity of faith, our shared faith and our shared destiny. When I say unity, I mean that we are one people with diverse beliefs, opinions, worldviews, and ways of life. Unity is not uniformity, and of course I do not, God forbid, I'm not saying, God forbid, anything about the culture of argumentation, protest, and Israeli disagreements and disputes, which is an inseparable part of our DNA as a state, and when we ultimately know how to democratically reach decisions. But we must not be confused, not even for 1 minute. We must not allow polarization to control us, because our enemies, they are not confused. If we do not listen to each other, if we do not hurt with each other, if we do not understand one another, despite the disagreements and disputes, if we become communities and camps who no longer remember what connects them, we might lose not just our one nation, but our one state. We must remember at all times this amazing Israeli cohesion, which is so rare and bold and beautiful, that we've seen in the past 6 months, both in the home front and in the front lines, is our real character. And the third pillar is that of belief and spirit and hope, our profound belief in the justice of our path, the spirit of fighting for a better future. The story of Colonel Simcha Appelbaum, deputy commander of Brigade 188 in the 73 war, is an excellent example for that. Simcha, who was prisoner number 78524 in Auschwitz-Birkenau, and he was also a partisan. He lost his entire family in the Holocaust, and after World War II, he realized the vow he made on the March of Death. He made Aliyah. He was one of the founders of Kibbutz Netzer Sireni and became a commander in the IDF. And when he spoke to these soldiers in one of the terrible battles in the Golan Heights during the 73 war, the Yom Kippur War, he looked at all his soldiers and he said, I started fighting before you were all born. 4 wars in Israel and 1 world war in Europe. And the most terrible one was in Europe. They took away my parents, all my family members, and we couldn't even protect ourselves, lift an arm, say anything. And I have never seen them ever since. And if you ask yourselves what a man my age is doing here, well, here's the answer. I am fighting men, and I am fighting like a madman, so that what had happened to the people of my generation will never happen again. That's what he said. This belief in the righteousness of our path is the source of the spirit of combat of our people, the esprit de corps, the spirit of fighting for hope, for a future, for our national homeland, in our homeland, and for peace among us and with our neighbors. This combat spirit is that of the Holocaust survivors and of all the soldiers who fought in Israel's wars. And this is the fighting spirit of this generation, of the residents of the Western Negev and the north of Israel and the entire Israeli society. And this is the spirit of fighting. It's about hope and future. And I was so moved to see what was written in the Haggadah of the members of Kibbutz Me'eri at the establishment of the State of Israel. They wrote in their Haggadah, and we shall not forget, because it is only thanks to them and thanks to all the Jews we have made it this far, and it is for them and for all the other Jews we are fighting right now. We will stand firmly at our our place, and no bad wind will move us. Our beloved Holocaust survivors, you are our internal heroes. Your legacy is that of resurrection, of hope, of pride. You are the source of my absolute belief that our nation can overcome anything, everything. We will plant, we will build, and we will maintain this fire. And God willing, we will spread out new shoots, just like you did, on behalf of the past and for the future. And we will prove to the whole world that the eternal people is here, and it is here to stay. Am Israel Chai. May the memory of the millions of our brothers and sisters who were murdered in the Holocaust by the Nazis and their accomplices be forever blessed and etched in the heart of our nation for every generation.
We just heard President Isaac Herzog speak there. Avi, of course, relating it to all the events that we have been talking about, the October 7th attack and the surge in anti-Semitism that has been responded, and maybe some political messages there, too, of the importance of maintaining alliances with powers relating to maybe some of the, for example, tensions with the U.S. right now.
Sure. I think Herzog is a political animal, not only a president, and he feels that there might be some problems developing between Netanyahu and the Biden administration. So he tries somehow to calm the spirit and tell both parties, please continue to work together. But the gist of what he said, I think, was a comparison between the situation today and what it was in the 40s, and especially the rise of anti-Semitism in the world. You know, Caleb, until now, you couldn't be anti-Semitic. Until a year ago, it was politically wrong. You could not be anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic. Suddenly, all at once, it came back. Today, it is legitimate. You know, on American campuses, they are shouting against Jews, not only against Israel.
People drawing those comparisons with the 30s and 40s. Now, President Herzog mentioned the fighting spirit of the communities in the Western Negev. Let's go down to one of those communities, Kibbutz Yad Mordechai, scene of many historic battles in Israel, right north of the border of the Gaza Strip. Our correspondent, Zach Anders, is down there. And Zach, the commemorations down there, too, on a difficult day, not only for Israel, but also especially down there on the border of Gaza. Some, unfortunately, tragic incidents just today there.
Yeah, that's right. Kerem Shalom under fire, and it's remarkable to see what was taking place at the time. This is an area that's being used to facilitate and stage some of the aid crossings. The IDF says at about 1:30 in the afternoon, about 300 to 400 meters in the direction of Rafah was a mortar launch. 10 mortars hit the location near soldiers, including some reservists, as many as 10 injured. We're told 3 seriously. We have not received an update at this point in the night. The number jumped quite a bit throughout the day. It was originally 5 injured, then 7, now 10. And from what we can tell, it does appear that that's the accurate representation of all involved. One of the things that has happened in the last hour since our last update, Hamas has published a video purporting, they said this is the launch that took place. It's absolutely, there's no way that it could be. They're showing a video of old rocket launches, and they're very obviously using, they're very obviously rockets. And some of the video that we've seen from the other side, the footage of Kerem Shalom, it's very clearly mortars. The IDF are describing these as mortars, much smaller munition. Some of the other movement we've seen in the meantime, it looks like in the Kerem Shalom area, there's been trucks moving in additional shelters as well.
All right, Zach Anders down there on south. Let's go here, Prime Minister Netanyahu at Yad Vashem.
Distinguished President of the State of Israel and his wife, I shall do as you did, and I would like to say, distinguished audience, one and all, And of course, first and foremost, Holocaust survivors who are such a tremendous inspiration to all of us, both in the difficult war. You are the testimony to the resurrection after the extinction of the communities. You are of such fierce spirit. Major Moshe Yedidia Leiter of blessed memory, an officer in the Shaldag unit, went to battle in the Gaza Strip with the legacy of the Holocaust upon his shoulders. And it is not just a way of speaking, it is a reality. Throughout his military service, when his father Yechiel asked him, "How can you carry such a heavy weight?" Moshe would always answer, "This is the weight of the generations, a weight of responsibility which gives meaning to my service in the IDF." Moshe Leiter was named after his great-grandfather. He was born in Galicia, moved to Vienna, and then escaped from Vienna to Switzerland, from Switzerland to France, and ultimately arrived in New York. Many of his relatives were murdered and massacred in the extermination camps. He and his little children, along with his wife, managed to escape Austria during the week of the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria to Germany, to Nazi Germany in 1938. Moshe and his family members never forgot the sound of the boots clanking as they marched the streets of Vienna. Captain Moshe Leiter, his great-grandson, went into war leading his soldiers, the war in Gaza, because he understood that he was also fighting for his great-grandfather and for the 6 million of our brothers and sisters. Moshe, one of our best soldiers and best commanders, a father of 6, was killed as an officer in reserve duty in Bet Hanun. During the Shiva, his father Yechiel said, if the state of Israel would not have been established after the Holocaust, then the image that would have been etched in our minds is that picture, the image of the child, that young boy in the Warsaw ghetto raising his hands as he faced the Nazis. But the state of Israel was established, and it put weapons in the arms of our sons, of our children. We did so that we can protect ourselves from those who seek to harm and kill us. Tomorrow, Yechiel Leiter, the bereaved father, will participate in the March of the Living in Auschwitz-Birkenau, and the message he will say in that platform is never again. And this is the message we say here on the mountains of Jerusalem. I'd like to make it clear, never again means now. Never again, because 80 years after the Holocaust, after the terrible murder of 6 million Jews, 1/3 of our people, once again, there are evil people who are ruthless and brutal, and they massacred us, raped and tortured and abducted. And I wish to emphasize the atrocious terror attack on October 7th was not a Holocaust, not because of an absence of intention to annihilate us, but because of the absence of the ability to do so. Because the intention is the same intention. The Nazis strove to kill the Jews until the very last one. The murders of Hamas are guided by the exact same goal. They kill children and babies, men, women, young, old, and they do so without batting their eyes, and they have abducted our brothers and sisters, and they are still holding half of them captive in their dark cellars. We are determined to take all of them out of that terrible and dark abyss. Both the ones who are dead and the ones who are alive. We are determined to bring them back to their families. Our hearts are with them, and we are going to fight against the monsters of Hamas, and we're going to complete the obliteration of its capabilities. I say monsters not just because of their terrible atrocities, but also because of the fact that they are proud of it. They boast it. They stream their murders live, and in a children's room in Gaza, which was a center for terrorists in Hamas, and our soldiers found there a copy of Hitler's book Mein Kampf translated to Arabic. In another house, they found a little girl's tablet with Adolf Hitler's picture as a screensaver. There is one direct and very dark line connecting between those terrible murderers of the past to the terrible murderers of the present. But this is exactly where the difference lies between Holocaust and resurrection. In contrast to the Holocaust, where we were helpless as we faced our murderers, today the Jewish people has a force that can defend it. After the massacre of October 7th, we fought back, and this war will end, God willing, with absolute victory. Our enemies have made a grave mistake. They thought that we were a weak society, a rifted, ruthless society without any power of standing. But they were mistaken. At the moment of truth, we stood side by side, shoulder to shoulder, filled with determination and resilience and power. Our test, my dear friends, our test as citizens of Israel is to continue and stand together until we reach victory, because these are fateful days, and that is the only way to guarantee our existence and our future. We are fighting at a double front. First of all, we are fighting the zealous regime of Iran and their terror proxies who are striving to annihilate us, and they do so out in the open. And the other thing is the outburst of this terrible anti-Semitic volcano spouting terrible vitriol against us all over the world. And we must say simply, the anti-Semitism that was hidden in Western countries since the Holocaust is now returning, and we see its ugly face. In past generations, they said about the Jews that we poison wells, that we use the blood of children to bake matzahs, and that we spread diseases. Today, they are spreading new libels against us of starving the Gazans, of genocide, but the truth is the exact opposite. What genocide are they talking about? We are doing everything in our ability in order to avoid harming civilians. We are taking measures that no other army in history has ever taken. And what starvation are they talking about? Since the beginning of the war, we've allowed trucks filled with food and medicine to enter Gaza exactly in order to prevent hunger, exactly in order to prevent a humanitarian crisis, just like in the past. These false accusations are not leveled at us because of the actions that we do, but because of the mere fact that we exist. But unfortunately, so many people in the world believe these lies, and they believe them for one reason and one reason only. It's because we are Jews. What complete moral bankruptcy. The lie has become truth. Truth has become a lie. And our prophet Isaiah has said already, oh, woe on those who say good for bad and bad for good, and confuse light with darkness and darkness with light. This terrible situation has now reached the most prestigious campuses in the West. Jewish students those who support Israel are threatened daily, are harassed daily. They are afraid to be seen with any Jewish trait, a Star of David, a kippah, a tzitzit. Jewish scholars and professors are beaten and humiliated. These bullies break into classrooms and shatter the windows. It reminds us of things that happened in the universities in Germany back in the 1930s. Yes, they smashed windows there as well. But now, today, it is happening in the U.S. in 2024. Our brothers and sisters in the diaspora, we stand together and face the hatred both here and there. And another terrible scandal might occur between the walls of the International Criminal Court in The Hague. And this tribunal, which was established following the Holocaust and other atrocities in order to guarantee that it will never happen again, is considering issuing warrants, arrest warrants against Israel's leaders and military commanders. And if that will happen, the purpose is to undermine our most basic right, the most basic right of any country, the right to defend itself. What an absurdity. What a distortion of justice and history. Such a measure will place a grave stain on the mere concept of international justice. I would like to say that this intention to tie our hands, to restrict our options, are set against us. But from here in Jerusalem, I send a very clear-cut message. You will not chain our hands. And even if Israel has to stand alone, it will stand alone, and it will continue to fight back against our enemies until victory. Even if we must stand alone, we will continue to fight this human evilness. As the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, the country of a proud people that has existed for millennia, I swear that no pressure, no decision of no international forum will prevent us from defending ourselves from those who seek to annihilate us. For this holy purpose, Captain Moshe Leiter of blessed memory was killed, and for that goal, all our brave soldiers were killed in action, and our heroes were not killed in vain. On this occasion, here in Jerusalem, I would like to say a few words in English for the whole world.
In the Holocaust, the Jewish people were totally defenseless against those who sought our destruction. No nation came to our aid. Today, we again confront enemies bent on our destruction. I say to the leaders of the world, no amount of pressure, no decision by any international forum will stop Israel from defending itself. As the Prime Minister of Israel, the one and only Jewish state, I pledge here today from Jerusalem on this Holocaust Remembrance Day. If Israel is forced to stand alone, Israel will stand alone. But we know we're not alone, because countless decent people around the world support our just cause. And I say to you, we will defeat our genocidal enemies. Never again is now.
Ladies and gentlemen, during the Holocaust, we were muted and defenseless. Nobody heard us cry out. Nobody came to help us. We will not go back to these dark times. The State of Israel will not bow its head to these murders and the perpetrators of anti-Semitism. We will speak out our voice loud and clear. We will defend ourselves proudly and bravely, and we will make sure that this nation lives for eternity.
coming back to studio? Yeah. All right, we've just heard Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu give I would call it a defiant speech. Basically his message that if Israel has to stand alone, and for example, there are reports just this evening of the United States perhaps holding up an arms shipment to Israel, as it looks like the possibility has increased following that attack on Kerem Shalom. Israel will go into Rafiah, that Israel will go ahead. A different message, some similarities between President Herzog, but he stressed alliances with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who spoke in English, I think for the first time I heard, in a speech from Yad Vashem, basically telling the world that Israel, if it has to, will stand alone.
I think, Kalev, that his few words in English were addressed to President Biden.
I think it was a direct message.
A direct message to President Biden in English, saying exactly what you said. If need be, we will stand alone and do the job alone. And that's, I think, if you ask me, what is the central message of all this quite lengthy and good speech of the Prime Minister, both in Hebrew and in English? One, that we will not let the Holocaust be repeated. Two, and if we have to, we will stand alone and do the job. I think this is the central message. It was said twice in Hebrew, once in English. I think the message is clear, and I believe if it comes today when a deal about the hostages seems a little bit less possible.
Because of the attack on Kerem Shalom.
Of course. Today. I mean, the Hamas attacked Kerem Shalom in the middle of negotiation. That's a sure signal that somehow they do not want a deal. So, as we can see to our regret that the deal is slowly going away, Prime Minister said, we will act, and if we have to act alone. This is a very clear message, and in order to be well understood, he said it in English too, and I think it is understood. And now we'll see what the developments are.
All right, well, I should note it will carry some diplomatic risks. Let's go back now to the ceremony.
Six torches will be lit in memory of the 6 million, our brothers and sisters who were murdered by the Nazi Germans and their accomplices, and in honor of the Holocaust survivors who reclaimed their lives and joined the national effort to build and establish the State of Israel and became key partners in the preservation of the memory of the Holocaust and its inculcation to future generations. The lighters of the 6 torches will be accompanied by their family members. The first torch will be lit by Pnina Hefer from the Weiss family, born in Noș-Felau, Romania.
נולדתי בטרנסילבניה. היינו בסך הכל 21 ילדים, אני מספר 20. הקהילה היהודית בטרנסילבניה הייתה מאוד מאוחדת. כולם הכירו את כולם, הייתה ערבות הדדית בעת צרה. כל הקהילה דאגה שלכולם יהיה. אבא שלי היה רב של הקהילה, והיה מנהיג הקהילה, וישמעו לדבריו. כל מוצאי שבת הוא סיפר לנו משהו על ארץ ישראל. בתור ילדים חלמנו, שרנו, נשמנו את ארץ ישראל. אז התחיל הכיבוש הנאצי, וכל מה שהיה נהדר נהפך להיות עצוב נורא. ובגיל 16 הגענו לאושוויץ. אני זוכרת כשהרכבת עצרה, הדלתות נפתחו, שנל, מהר. הפרידו בין גברים ונשים. אני הייתי מאוד צמודה לאמא שלי, ופתאום הרגשתי איזו דחיפה חזקה. קראו אותי ממנה. ואני לא אשכח אף פעם את העיניים של אמא שלי. איך היא בכתה. ראיתי אותה מתרחקת, ואחר כך ראינו עשן. בכל מקום שפניתי, ראיתי רק עשן. רעב, תנאים מגונים של כלבים. מספרים את הראש לקרחת. מאוד פחדתי ומאוד בכינו, כולנו. לא הייתה אחת עם עיניים יבשות. היו ניצוצות של אור באפלה הגדולה הזאת. זה היה בערב ראש השנה, ובא לקראתנו אסיר יהודי, ומוציא מהבגד שלו סידור תפילה. עשינו את העסקה, נתנו את הלחם תמורת הסידור. אנחנו היינו מאושרות עם הסידור, וזה מה שנתן לנו את התקווה להחזיק אותנו. אני זוכרת את היום ששחררו אותנו. זכרנו את ההבטחה שהבטחנו לאבא, ועלינו לארץ ישראל. אמרתי שאני רוצה להיות מורה, וקיבלתי עבודה מיד, וחשבתי שאני המיליונרית של העולם. וברוך השם, מצאתי את בעלי, שאני רואה את הילדים שלי ואת הנכדים, וכולם מקסימים. אני חושבת שיש מספיק סיבות להיות מאושרים.
Let the torch be lit.
משמר, דום. המשמר יעבור לנוח, עמוד נוח.
The second torch will be lit by Allegra Guta from the Naim family born in Benghazi, Libya.
בבנגזי היה בית גדול, ילדות טובה מאוד, וגדלנו 10 ילדים, 3 אחים ו7 בנות. לא היה חסר לנו שום דבר, חיינו מעל ומעבר. הייתה קהילה יהודית נהדרת, היו תומכים אחד בשני. בבנגזי לא היו אנשים עניים, כי הקהילה עזרה. ועשינו כל החגים. קידוש בערב שבת היה עושה עם 2 האחים שלי. חיינו יחד עם הערבים כמו אחים. לא הייתה בינינו שום שנאה, לא ידענו מה זה ערבי יהודי. כולנו שכנים, כולנו בני אדם. אני זוכרת הערב הראשון של פרוץ המלחמה, כל לילה צצות. פחדנו, ברור שפחדנו. ואז הגרמנים החליטו שגם היהודים של בנגזי צריכים לקחת אותם למחנה. הביאו משאית ענקית, המיסו אותנו כמו חיות, לא כמו בני אדם. אחד על השני, אולי 6-7 משפחות היו על המשאית. ונוסעים. לא ידענו לאן לוקחים אותנו, זה האמת לאמיתה. ואז הגענו למחנה ג'אדו, לא היה מיטות, ישנו על הרצפה, לא היה חיים של בני אדם. זה היו חיים של עינויים. לא היה מספיק אוכל, כל הזמן רצינו לאכול ולא היה מספיק. אחרי 5 חודשים התחילה מחלת הטיפוס שם. מחלה התפשטה כמעט על כל המחנה, התחילה מוות יומיומי, ואבא שלי חלה. ואני שואלת, איפה אבא? נפטר בלילה. זה שלא אשכח, לעולם. זה כבר עברו 80 שנה, אבל כאילו שאני רואה את אבא שלי עכשיו מול העיניים. בחודש נובמבר 48 הגענו לישראל. שמחנו מאוד מאוד, יש אנשים שעשו ומחאו כפיים, הגענו לישראל. לא לפחד מאף אחד, ביטחון. והכרתי את בעלי ב-51 באפריל, הייתי יפה וצעירה, וב-52 התחתנו. יש לי 2 ילדים, 3 נכדים, ו6 נינים. תמיד היה לי חיים מלאים, אני משחקת ברידג', אני שוחה, אני עושה התעמלות. אני אוהבת את המדינה שלי. היא המדינה היחידה שיש לנו, ואני רוצה שתהיה לעד.
Let the torch be lit.
משמר, דום. המשמר יעבור לנוח, עמוד נוח.
The third torch will be lit by Aryeh Eitani, born in Milan, Italy.
אני נולדתי לפני 96 שנים באיטליה, כבן יחיד להורים ממוצא הונגרי. ילדותי באיטליה הייתה נפלאה. גדלתי כאיטלקי לכל דבר. הייתי מאושר. אמי, זיכרונה לברכה, תמיד שרה לי כל מיני שירים באיטלקית. Mamma son tanto felice perché ritorno da te. La mia canzone ti dice che è più bel giorno per me. והייתי מאוד קשור אליה. הייתי פטריוט איטלקי. ראינו את עצמנו איטלקי לכל דבר. ב-39 גורשנו ללונגריה. שם באמת הייתי עטוב בשבתות עם טלית, הנקתי תפילים, הוא לימד אותי בר מצווה, סבא. קיימנו חיים יהודים מלאים עד הגירוש. תורנו הגיע ב10 ליוני 44, הגענו לאושוויץ, הדלתות נפתחו, ואז כאילו שערי הגיהנום נפתחו מאליי. צריכות של חיילי אס-אס, נביחות של הכלבים, אמא שלי ושתי סבתות, סבא, הלכו לכיוון הגזים. הייתה שם תזמורת, נגנה שירי לחם, להרגיע את האנשים שיהיו רגועים שמחכה להם משהו.